Jesteśmy zespołem terapeutów DBT
i opowiadamy o terapii dialektyczno-behawioralnej
z myślą o osobach doświadczających dysregulacji emocjonalnej,
a także ich bliskich, terapeutach i wszystkich, którzy chcą nas posłuchać.
Robimy ten podcast, bo wiemy, że terapia DBT jest skuteczna
i pomaga w zbudowaniu życia wartego przeżycia.
Jeśli uważasz, że to, co robimy, ma sens,
możesz nas wesprzeć za pośrednictwem serwisu Patronite.
www.patronite.pl/kurs na DBT.
No to co? Jedziemy!
All right, so it's 19th May, Sunday. We're in Warsaw, and this is a national conference of Polish Association of Cognitive and Behavioral Therapies. And here with me is Professor Alanem Fruzzettim. He's a renowned expert in DBT field. He wrote more than 100 of papers and chapters and books, and he's our teacher and our mentor in DBT. And I'm really, really glad that you agreed to spend some time with us in our podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure. I've enjoyed coming to Poland and getting to know so many Polish therapists. The DBT Association here has done such a wonderful job developing and implementing DBT, and I'm just delighted to be part of it.
Great. I'm also very happy and I'm thankful to Polish Association of DBT that they are doing their job. This is great. We were happy to take part in your workshop yesterday, and it was on chain analysis. So my first question would be about behaviorism in DBT, because whenever Polish people are hearing the word behaviorism, they think of Pavlovian dogs or dog training, and this really gets people to think some nasty stuff about behaviorism. Right. And I wanted to ask you, would you maybe say a few words about behaviorism in DBT for our listeners to have a better view on that?
Sure. Like woof, woof, I want to be validating first, because I think that, behaviorism started as a science of trying to understand behavior 100 years ago, in the 1920s, 1930s, and 40s. And in those days, there really were two versions of behaviorism, the Pavlovian or classical conditioning and the Skinnerian or operant conditioning, Eastern Europe versus US. But both included both. I mean, I think certainly both are relevant. And they're very relevant in terms of learning certain things, right? If you think about learning to speak Polish instead of speaking English, it's very much about consequences and shaping and reinforcement. And when you think about associational learning, it's a lot like dogs and fear of dogs. It's not so much food powder, but if you get bitten by a dog, a lot of people develop a phobia of dogs, and that's great. I've been a behavior therapist for now, oh my goodness, almost 40 years, and I've never treated a dog phobic or a spider phobic or a snake phobic. I mean, these are not so common things. The good news is that in the 1960s and 70s, there was the so-called cognitive revolution. People realized that the Pavlovian and the operant models didn't do much with thinking. They thought of them as epiphenomena, which is kind of dismissive. And then in the 80s, Marshy Linehan, primarily Marsha, brought emotion into behavior therapy because, in fact, Skinner talked about emotions as epiphenomena. And epiphenomena just means it's a side effect, not very important. Turns out that they aren't epiphenomena, that we're humans, that actually our thoughts and our emotions provide the richness of our experience in the world. And feeling better when we feel terrible or seeking joy turn out to be big motivators of our behavior. So modern behavior therapy, starting in the 1980s and since, fortunately for me, this has been most of my training, has been a much more integrative, thoroughgoing understanding of humans in behavior therapy. So we understand the role of emotions, the role of thinking, the outsized role that judgments have, and in fact, some of the phenomena of being human that actually create problems for us. For example, we have this ability to think about the future, to imagine something, and then have emotions right now, even though it's not happening. Yeah. Don't do this if you're listening, but if I were to, stop talking and think about getting hit by a car, and I really threw myself into the situation and went and sat by the roadside so I could hear the sounds of the road, I could generate some fear. Even though I'd be sitting there sipping my coffee and enjoying my day, fear could show up. That's a distinctly human experience, the ability to think about the future and have emotion in response to that. Similarly, past, we can think about the past, remember the past, and have emotions as though that's happening right now. Now, part of that is fear conditioning, which we know is real. But part of it's this strange human enterprise of being able to think and imagine and and the fact is that our emotions respond to that. We didn't evolve for that. Our emotion system evolved first. So really, evolutionarily, we don't automatically know how to handle those odd, not well-functioning emotions that don't serve us well. In danger, fear serves us really well. It gets us safe, It gives us cues and gets us moving. Sadness serves us well. It gives us information that we've lost something. We don't keep trying to do the things that we used to enjoy because they're not available because we've lost something. Yeah. Maybe my dog died. It didn't bite me. It was my companion, Or, as I often say, my favorite restaurant is closed. That is not the kind of thing that your dog or cat or a squirrel or a fish ever have to deal with. Yeah. But we humans do. And when our favorite restaurant is closed, we are disappointed. And that gives us good information. Don't bang on the door, get support, soothe, and go find another restaurant, which most of us can do. We call that regulated emotion, and it's part of the richness of being a human. So in the 21st century, most modern behavior therapy, there are still some strands left that only deal with environmental control. But most modern behavior therapy very much understands the key roles that emotions and thinking have in our overt behavior.
Yeah. Okay, so it looks for me as if the modern behaviorism was integrated with our knowledge on emotions and cognitions, and it's like an integrated framework, not just Pavlovian dogs who salivate with, and it's just not only that, there's much more to behaviorism than people used to think about when they hear the word behaviorism.
Absolutely. It's and I think the word integration is nice because psychological science, if we say what is psychology, I realize there's a lot of disagreement about that, but I would say that psychology is the science of behavior. Mm-hmm. Now, some people say behavior and mind, then we become dualists. Mm-hmm. So if we don't become dualists, we simply say behavior, but behavior isn't just the things we do physically with our body, but anything we do. Attention is behavior. I shift my attention from looking at you to looking at the floor. That's, even if I don't move my head, even if I don't move my eyes, my attention goes there. It's still a behavior. If my emotion shifts from irritation to joy, that's a behavior, or vice versa. If I think about what I want to do tomorrow, that's behavior. What if I think about what I did yesterday? That's behavior. If I pay attention to you in the present moment, that's probably really effective behavior. Yeah. So modern behavior therapy is integral to modern psychological science. I actually don't mind if you say psychology is the study of behavior and mind, as long as you then define mind as the thinking and feeling, the things that are inside our skin. And if you want to say behavior is the overt, outside the skin stuff, that's fine. Or for me, it's just all things we do. Yeah. They're all things we do. And the beauty of a behavioral way of thinking about this is to say, these are not things that are beyond our understanding. We learn them.
Yeah.
We learn them. And so if we simply say behavior therapy is all about how we learn behaviors, sometimes we learn maladaptive behaviors, things that don't serve us very well, but they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
We did learn them. They worked in some way, or we wouldn't have learned them. And how do we unlearn or realistically learn new things?
Yeah.
You know,
And
it's also informed by modern cognitive neuroscience. You know, we know, for example, that we don't really unlearn things. We put down new trails of synapses with new behaviors. It's a little like going in the forest. You know, there's a well-trodden path. That's going to stay there for a long time, even if you don't walk on it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, maybe in 100 years, but, you know, I'll be dead by then. You know, maybe it will have grown. You won't see the old path anymore. Although, you know, you can still see some of the Roman pathways, you know, in Europe. And they're pretty old, you know.
they're still there.
Yeah. In the U.S., you can go out to the Great Prairies and you can still see where the wagon trains left ruts in the prairie 150 years ago. And, you know, it takes a while to but that doesn't mean we don't have new roads and trains and airplanes that take us much more efficiently where we want to go.
I think that's another metaphor for what we do in DBT is that we train and train and train and generalize our skills in even more contexts. And by that, we hope that these old paths won't be that available, then the new ones will become available.
Exactly. So. Right. And without throwing away what we learned from Pavlov or Skinner, because, you know, so again, I don't want anybody to get stuck there, but if you think about somebody, I'm assuming anybody who's listening at some point had a relationship that didn't end well, you know, if you're listening, you're probably an adult and you probably had a relationship that didn't end well. Sorry about that. Me too. You know, it's not unusual, right? And if you think about when I just brought this person up in your mind, right? And what emotion did you notice? It was not, lovey, warm, fuzzy. I want to call them and say hello, maybe go have coffee. It was probably like, you know, it was now, but if you think about the first time you started to be attracted to that person walked into the room, that was a very different emotional reaction. But after whatever happened between then and the end of that relationship, that's conditioning, right? Yeah. In the beginning, there's a interest, curiosity, a little bit, not so much, don't know the person. And then that got to be a warm reaction, maybe a very positive reaction, maybe joy, maybe love. And then at some point later, much later, it's some combination of something that we would call dislike. It might be fear, probably not quite justified, but we might conditioned fear, right? It's like, oh no, this person had yelled at me and treated me badly. Oh, and you know, they live in another city. They're not treating me badly today, but yet I could still have that fear response or other negative responses, you know, and that's almost directly from Pavlov, but it's not enough, right? We need more because we're not dogs.
Yeah, definitely.
We're not dogs. We have this big brain. It has not just a brain stem, but a midbrain and a forebrain. And and so there's a lot of other stuff going on there.
So I think our listeners now quite understand or get that when we talk about behaviorism, we are actually having a lot of ground to cover. Mm-hmm. So it's both like everything and emotions and what we do and what we think and what we remember or recall and stuff like that. So I would like to quickly ask you, how do we approach this in DBT? Because you were teaching us yesterday about the behavior analysis or chain analysis, and can we get our listeners to get a grasp of what is it that we're doing in individual therapy with this behaviors? Right.
Well, probably the first and most important step that distinguishes behavior therapy, modern behavior therapy, from most other therapies is the precision in targeting and our insistence on describing the behavior that we want to change.
Yeah.
or the behavior that's missing, if you prefer. So we don't talk about, we're going to help people feel better. That's probably true, but our target is not feeling better. Yeah. Our target is changing people's responses, their behaviors, overt behaviors, emotional behaviors, thinking behaviors, so that they can engage the world more effectively. Okay, so that might mean doing things overtly differently. I'm looking at you, I'm making eye contact. I like you. We know each other a little bit. So I can't help it. I smile because I know you. I like you, right? There it is. That's a learned response, right? I mean, probably the first time I met you, it
wasn't there.
It probably
could be there.
It might have been a much smaller version. Yeah. Like I was happy to meet you, but I didn't know you. I had no expectations, right? But when I meet people, I have a really conditioned. I've had a lot of criticism, invalidation. When I meet you, I don't know, you could describe, I'm furrowing my brow, right?
Just a bit.
Yeah, and I'm not smiling. So notice you're doing the same back, right? I don't know if you meant to do that. So my behavior, my overt behavior reflects my emotion. Probably easier to change my emotion than to change, like, can I relax my face and smile? If I relax my face and smile when I'm scared, it's going to look fake. I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't. I don't think I can do that on cue, but it would look fake. You'd know it instantly, and you would not. I might smile, but you might look back at me with a furrowed brow, like, what's going on here?
Intuitively, I would get it.
You would, right? Because we're social animals. This thing about faces is very interesting. If you drive a car, you can look all the way across an intersection when someone pulls up, and you can tell whether they're going to let you go or whether you have to let them go. And that's they may be 30, 35 meters away, and their little face through the lousy lighting, and we can tell from their face whether we're going to have a conflict in the intersection, and then whether we're going to let them go or whether they're politely letting us go. And that's evolutionary. Our ability to do that is evolutionary. What we do with it then is learned. Yeah. So if I can look at you and be happy to see you, that elicits a transaction, right? Pretty pleasant, pretty nice. But if I've got this history of invalidation, what I elicit instead is a little standoffishness in other people. Like, what's going on with you? Fake smile. What's up with this fake smile? Or I don't even fake smile. I just don't even make eye contact. Hi. Yeah, nice to meet you. Whatever. It's very hard to build friendships that way. Very hard to do. So, but I said a moment ago that it's probably easier to change my emotion than it is to actually create a genuine smile and good eye contact without changing the emotion. I think that's impossible. But actually, the first thing to change in DBT is my attention. How I pay attention. Do I bring my attention to you and actually pay attention to you as opposed to maybe some conditioned emotion inside my body, right? If I had a lot of fear conditioning, a lot of conditioning to be rejected, I'm rejection sensitive, but I look at you, you don't look mean, you don't look like you're about to yell at me, you look pretty nice, pretty pleasant. That helps me relax a little, and then I can lean back a little not in a withdrawing kind of way, but in a relaxed kind of way. And then all of a sudden, after 30 seconds or 2 minutes, I can have a gentle, genuine smile because in this moment, you're actually not going to give me a pile of invalidation. And so I can change my emotion by changing and this is what we do in DBT. We figure out what's the most effective way, if I'm lonely, to build relationships. Ordinary CBT will teach me some social skills. If I have managed emotion, that's probably all I need. I need to make a little better eye contact. If I make a little better eye contact, you're a little more responsive, and then we're off. Yeah, that's fine. But if my emotion's getting in the way, if I make eye contact, but I still look at you like you're going to hit me, verbally, it won't help. The social skill won't work. Yeah. It's too the subtleties of it are not the things that we train. We can train someone to make eye contact. We can't train them to have what's called a Duchenne smile. You can't train somebody to have that. It's got to come from a place of interest, at least, and possibly joy. So in DBT, we're interested in where we intervene. There's this complex set of things, thinking things, emoting things, sensory things in our bodies, and overt behaviors that are all happening at the same time. We can pluck out of that very sophisticated stream of behavior, because they're all behaviors in my language anyway. We can pluck out what's the most effective way to have the next thing I do be effective instead of ineffective.
It's so interesting because there was a moment when I thought that in DBT, when we kind of concentrate on changing our behavior, one would say that you can fake it until you make it, that you change your behavior until you actually feel comfortable with the behavior. And what you're saying is quite different. You say that it's not necessarily effective to change your behavior without changing your inner stance. And you have to also know how to work on that stance. And you work on it with shifting attention or by working with attention.
That's our core skill. Paying attention on purpose in a particular way. Now, the fake it till you make it, by the way, I think that's terribly problematic sometimes. And sometimes it's useful. Yeah. Like I wake up in the morning, maybe, and I don't feel like getting out of bed, and I feel grumpy and irritable, and I don't want to go to work. Fake it till you make it might mean get out of bed. Can I see that getting out of bed anyway and getting going and getting a shower and having a cup of coffee and enjoying my cup of coffee, actually, then I'm making it now. It's not fake it till you make it in the sense of like, okay, I'm going to fake this interaction 35 times and then eventually I'll be happy to see you. It's sit down next to you, even though my urge is to run away, and get myself to look at you. Okay, I'm not sure I love calling that faking it, but for some clients, they'll say, but I don't feel like doing that. It doesn't feel, that's the conditioned emotion. So what's your goal? Your goal is to not be so lonely? How you're going to make friends, right? Right. So how you're going to get yourself to sit down and think like this, I got to practice not being so scared of people who don't even know me and are probably not going to hurt me. Mm-hmm. And if they do, I've had some practice with that. I'm not changing my cognition. Oh, you're a safe person. You're a nice person. I don't know that. I'm faking it. I'm getting myself to do the thing that I need to do to find out, could we be friends? Could we have a nice cup of coffee together? And that would, of course, be nice. I wouldn't be lonely for half an hour then.
So it's really interesting for me to hear that when we are looking at behaviors and we're doing the behavior analysis, we're really concrete and we are really like minute to minute or second to second, really specific, looking at the behavior and how it unfolds and how can we understand it, and then how can we kind of change it for the future, for it to change.
Right. The specificity of it. I think that is very much a behavior therapy thing. It's completely a DBT thing. And I would say that it's a big area of separation between the behavior therapies, and CBT as well. I mean, because cognitive therapists look at very specific, at least in the beginning, they look at specific thoughts. Then they look for patterns, and sometimes they start to look for underlying schemas, which is not so behaviorally specific. But certainly behavior therapy and the first piece of cognitive therapy are like, what were you thinking in that moment? Yeah. What was going on in your body? What was your emotion in that moment? What were you paying attention to? What were you looking at? Yeah. In that moment, okay, the alarm went off and I hated, I didn't want to get up. Well, what do you mean you didn't want to? What does that mean? What were you noticing? I was I was imagining being miserable. And so the idea of going back to sleep was less miserable. Yeah. Okay, now we understand
what happened.
Yeah. So if you're going to get me out of bed in that situation, you got to help me bring my attention to something else. Like what's enjoyable? In my morning routine, is there any part that's enjoyable? If there is, let's pay attention to that. Like, I like getting a shower. I like the hot water. I like having a cup of coffee. I like that. That's nice. So can I think about a nice warm shower and a cup of coffee? That's what I get if I get out of bed. Then whatever happens after, I can do the same thing with that too. Instead of what I get is I don't have to feel so overwhelmed and miserable. Well, that's going to get me back to bed. The shower and the coffee is going to get my feet on the ground. Mm-hmm. By the way, if you could put your feet on the ground, wiggle your toes, I'm not focusing on being miserable. I'm focusing on something we might call empowerment. I can wiggle my toes. Not a big deal, but it's like, okay, nice to have toes, nice to wiggle them. Noticing that, in the middle of the winter, it's nice and warm and cozy under the blanket, and it's kind of cold when I pull the blanket off. That's not maybe so pleasant, or maybe it's refreshing. I don't know. It depends on the person, right? If it's not so pleasant, then we keep some slippers right there. Maybe the slippers go under the covers at the end of the bed so they're nice and warm when I have to get out of bed in the morning. These are, you could say, gee, these are silly. How do you call that a skill? Well, the paying attention, the self-validation, the being effective, where you put your attention, those are definitely skills.
Yeah. So when you're a DBT patient, you can expect your therapist that you will, of course, tell a story of what happened to you, of what difficult situation you were in, but the therapist will try to get into this situation second by second and trying to figure out what actually happened with all the things that you could be not aware of, and then you will try to understand and unfold what happened, and then try to figure out what kind of skills or what kind of what could you have done differently with your attention, or what and stuff that you've told you're doing just that.
That's right. Because the dialectic word, the big D, right, means it has a lot of elements in DBT, but primarily it means balancing truths, right? Mm-hmm. Two things that seem opposite but can both be true. And we often talk about acceptance and change, which seem to be quite opposite, are both relevant and true in DBT. And that's the primary dialectic. But another way to think about this is balancing joy and suffering. It sometimes gets me in trouble, but I'll say it here. Yeah. Suffering is always available. Yeah. There's suffering in the world. And if we pay attention to it at any moment, and we're human beings, we can find suffering. We can find pain in other people's suffering. There are things in our own lives that are not the way we want them to be. No matter how good our lives are, there's something that it's painfully not what we want it to be. That's just universally true. And that one's not so hard for people to accept. And joy is also always available. Always available. Now, I can't speak for other people. I know what kinds of things I can find joy in. I can look at a picture of my kids or of my granddaughter. There's joy in me looking at those photos. There's joy, in aesthetics, things that you find aesthetically, whatever that is. Our aesthetics are different. It might be tactile. It might be visual. It might be art that you look at. It might be music. It could be interpersonal. It could be a human, and in 100 million or 100 billion other things. Joy is always available. But if we only suffer, we don't find joy, there's an inauthenticity and an unnecessary suffering to it. And if we try to only find joy and ignore the suffering gets bigger because we aren't honoring it. And then that joy collapses. Yeah. So it's about balance. It's not so that the joy in having warm slippers to put on, it's just a moment. I don't want to suggest that makes your whole life better. It makes that moment better and allows me to get out of bed, which then allows me to do something else, which gets me to work, which gets me not fired from my job, but also gets me to connect with somebody at work and not be as lonely. And it gets me a sense of okay, I have some purpose or something I can do. I have some if there are different words that we use for this, but some capacity for acting on my own. We might call that agency, I think is often a word we use for that. I think behavior therapists have ignored that word way too long. I have a little paper about this. I think agency is very important from a behavioral perspective. So at the moment of joy, it's not invalidating. It's not like, oh, come on, don't suffer. Look at all the wonderful things in the world. That's invalidating. It's like, oh my gosh, that's so hard. That's so awful. It's true. And can you complement that? Can you balance that with a little? Can you find it? Can you enjoy don't just chug your cup of coffee if you like coffee or tea or whatever it is. Just like take a moment and taste it. There's a little bit of joy in that moment. That the little bit might be 1% of your experience, but now you have 99% suffering and 1% joy, which recontextualizes the suffering. Mm-hmm. It's now not 100%. And for people who've been suffering a lot, that creates the possibility of change and therefore hope. Mm. And therefore motivation and all kinds of things can happen.
Yeah. And then you've got all these fruits of that work available for you.
That for a year or so, and you can really make some progress. Right? Yeah. So I add the year because I don't want anybody to think that I'm naive and saying, this is easy. It is not easy. It's hard. It takes a long time. There's a lot of reconditioning that has to happen. And learning new attentional behaviors, learning new emotional behaviors, learning new action behaviors.
And it's energy consuming, and it requires your time and effort to do this. All right, I could be doing this for another hour or two, and I really enjoy that. But I think we've got things to attend to. So thank you very much. We've covered a little bit of behaviorism, and I really like the balance thing that you said at the end. I really liked it. I'm hoping that one day maybe you would agree to have like another one podcast session with us. It would be a great pleasure. So again, thank you very much. It was Professor Alanem Fruzzettim who was our guest today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to do this. It's always fun to talk about these things with you, and of course, I'm happy to come back.
Yay! Great. Thanks.
Okay.
Oh, thank you so much.
Nie każdemu udaje się dotrzeć do końca odcinka.
Cieszymy się, że dopłynęliście tu razem z nami.
Jeśli uważasz, że to, co robimy, ma sens,
Możesz nas wesprzeć za pośrednictwem serwisu Patronite.
www.patronite.pl/kurs na DBT.
Wdzięcznie spożytkujemy każdą przekazaną nam wpłatę.
Stwórzmy razem ogólnopolską debetową społeczność.
Do usłyszenia w kolejnym odcinku.